Let me know when you want me to go, Marianne.
Yeah, sure. There's still a few people coming in, so we might just give it a minute and then we'll kick off.
Okay.
All right, we're probably good to go. There's still a few people coming in, but I think we're getting there.
Okay, so shall I get going?
Yeah.
Thanks, Marianne. Well, welcome everybody and good morning. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all gathering today. So wherever you may be, I am speaking myself from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nations. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to elders from other nations who may be with us today. My name, for those who don't know me, is Justine Hazelwood, and I'm the Director and Keeper of Public Records at Public Record Office Victoria. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Records Management Network event, the first for 2025. Quick reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be made available on our website after the event. We are fortunate to have a fantastic lineup of speakers today who will focus on addressing the challenges of implementing effective and secure artificial intelligence strategies, managing data and the transfer of digital records. And we look forward to hearing from all of our speakers today. Before we begin with those speakers, I do have a few updates about Public Record Office. So in terms of what Public Record Office has been up to, we have published an updated PROS 2502 Create, Capture and Control standard that is now available on the Standards Framework webpage. The previous PROS 19/05 Create, Capture and Control standard has been revoked. We would like to extend our thanks to the members of the Stakeholder Advisory Group and all of the other parties who provided valuable feedback on the revised standard. And for further details, please visit our blog page, and Marianne will post a link in the chat so you can all have a look and have a look at that if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet. We have introduced an enterprise mobility policy for all Victorian government offices. This is an update to a 2012 product, Mobile Technologies Policy, and it reflects more modern work practices. The policy ensures records are managed in line with the Public Records Act, regardless of device or location, and that record-keeping responsibilities are clear. It also addresses governance, risk mitigation, and challenges in managing records remotely, including issues with cloud environments and distinguishing personal from business records on mobile devices. And again, Marianne will post a link in the chat. We've recently released Managing Records in Microsoft 365, a guide for Victorian public offices. This was developed by Microsoft 365 expert Andrew Warland. This guide is designed to support public offices in effectively managing records across the Microsoft 365 environment. It covers essential topics such as admin roles, record storage, retention policies, and information architecture in tools like SharePoint, Exchange, Teams, Purview, and Entra. This resource will help agencies understand Microsoft 365's record-keeping capabilities and will also help you comply with our standards, including the new Create, Capture and Control standard. And again, there will be a link in the chat. Towards the end of last year, the Office of the Victorian Information Commissioner and Public Record Office Victoria released a joint statement to guide public sector organisations in safeguarding personal information. With increased threat of data breaches, it is crucial for organisations to be prepared. These incidents, often caused by malicious activity or human error or inadequate security, can damage reputations, can disrupt services and lead to financial losses or personal harm for those who are affected. And again, there will be a link in the chat to that statement. An update on the Sir Rupert Hamer Awards. These have been postponed. This is an initiative which is led by our Public Records Advisory Council, and we are in the process of appointing new members. So we'll wait until the council is at its full capacity before we proceed with the planning for these prestigious awards for records management excellence. We are also reviewing our online training offerings. We currently provide 2 free courses designed to help public officers understand their record-keeping requirements. As part of this review, we're looking for areas to update and to identify any knowledge gaps. We're also considering creating small courses on topics like managing records in the cloud, privacy and security, change management, leadership in records, and record keeping in the age of AI. So if you're interested, or if you've recently finished one of our training courses, we would love to hear your feedback. And Marianne is posting a link to a survey that we're running. So please help us out and fill that out if you have things that you would like to provide feedback on in regards to our training. We've recently updated our social media records topic page on our A to Z guides pages. So the key change of the guidance includes a refreshed list of social media platforms, an updated explanation of record-keeping practices, more interlinked PROV resources, and a new section on social media AI tools and record keeping. As social media continues to evolve, we would welcome any feedback or comment or suggestions that you might have on ways to improve that page, because it is a constantly changing environment. So again, Marianne has posted a link to that page. So have a look and give us some feedback. We are currently reviewing PROS 19/05 S1, which is the digitisation specification as part of our standards framework and the new Create, Capture and Control standard. So this is a specification under that standard. This standard applies to all Victorian government agencies, outlining requirements for managing records. Stakeholder feedback is now being sought, and feedback is actually due by tomorrow. But please let us know if you would like to provide feedback but would like an extension, and we can work with you to sort that out. Again, Marianne is posting a link, so you can find all of the details at that link. Records transfers. So you may recall that one of our previous Records Management Network presentations focused on the Department of Education's school records transfer project. This project is still ongoing, and a recent blog post called Echoes of Education, Archiving School Records for Future Generation showcases some of the progress made to date. I know that there are lots of researchers out there who are very excited by this project and would like to see it, like to see the records as they become available, which they will gradually do over the life of the project. We are hosting very soon our Community History Awards. That's on the 24th of March. These awards are presented in collaboration with the Royal Historical Society of Victoria. And these are annual awards which recognise individuals involved in community history projects who are dedicated to sharing local stories and that help all Victorians gain a deeper understanding of their history. So winners will be announced on our website following the event. So look out for those if you have an interest in history. We've also recently completed uploading copies of divorce case files up to the year 1940 onto our website. So these are digital copies of the paper originals. They were digitised a few years ago, but it's taken us a little bit of time to actually get them up online. And they were digitised as part of a partnership with Ancestry.com. We've also recently, our volunteers have completed name indexing of ward registers. So these registers, which track children in state custody during the early 20th century, are really vital records for anybody who's tracing anything to do with family separation. So really important records, now more accessible because of the indexes. And so that's it for our updates. Now we'll move to our exciting lineup of speakers. Each speaker will have a time at the end of their presentation to answer questions. And our team are online to help with any queries or to deliver your questions. So if you do have questions, we will endeavour to get them answered. So our first presentation today comes from B. Staffy and Melanie Flower from the Victorian Government Solicitor's Office. Just to give you a bit of background about your speakers, B is a highly experienced technology, IP and privacy lawyer with a background in top-tier firms and in-house in the technology transfer sector. She advises on newly developed technologies, including AI, and their privacy and data risks. B also has extensive expertise in intellectual property and ICT contracting, as well as Victorian government procurement policies. She leads VGSO's Technology and Data Protection Practice Group and serves as the VGSO's Privacy Officer. Melanie is an accomplished lawyer and specialises in technology law, IP, privacy data protection, and cybersecurity. She qualified as a solicitor in England and Wales and has worked in private practice in England and Australia and has held in-house technology secondments. Melanie advises government clients on technology procurements and has a specialised knowledge of ICT solutions, their licensing and commercialisation, and the maintenance and management of data within those systems. B and Melanie are here today to provide insights on the AI National Framework. So please welcome B and Melanie.
I think, sorry, I think B looks like she's muted at the moment.
Sorry, it's not letting me adjust it. Okay.
Hello, Marianne. I think you can hear me now, but I'm not sure
Yes.
if it's working.
Yes, I can hear you now there. Hang on, give me a sec. And
That's okay. Look,
I will allow the camera. There we go.
Thank you so much. All right. Look, thank you, Marianne, and good morning all. Before we commence, we would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country and their connections to land, sea and community, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Next slide, please. As Justine, and next one after that, please. As Justine mentioned, Melanie and I will be National Framework for Artificial Intelligence in Government. I will introduce the National Framework, and Melanie will speak to its cornerstones in detail. If we run out of time for questions, then please do feel free to reach out to us after the presentation. Now, to start, the National Framework is a high-level governance template for a whole-of-system approach to promoting the safe, secure and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence. It also assists the advancement of AI, but within the constraints of a system of ethics, values and needs. Next slide, please. Now, the National Framework concerns AI systems, and in 2023, the OECD defined an AI system as a machine-based system that, for explicit or implicit objectives, infers from the input it receives how to generate outputs such as predictions, content, recommendations or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments. Different AI systems vary in their levels of autonomy and adaptiveness after deployment. And as you may have recognised, the National Framework addresses a narrow form of artificial intelligence relating to systems that perform specific and learned tasks, and it's not concerned with those broad systems which are capable of general artificial intelligence. AI systems have for some time been met with, suspicion, and the Commonwealth Government began concerning itself with developing community trust in them to enable their adoption by all government departments. Consequently, in June 2024, Australia's data and digital ministers representing the Australian state and territory governments released the National Framework, and its objectives are to create a nationally consistent approach to the use and adoption of AI in government, and also to assist governments to develop, procure and deploy AI in a safe and responsible way. Next slide, please. In terms of its operation, the National Framework recommends both practices and cornerstones of AI assurance. As for the practices, the National Framework draws on and promotes Australia's existing AI ethics principles, which were first developed in 2019 and have a strong human rights basis, and it is arguably now more commonplace for new technologies to be analysed through rights-based tests such as charter assessments and privacy impact assessments to determine their human effect before they are adopted and distributed. These AI ethics principles are therefore your starting position when setting up practices for managing AI in your organisation. Next slide, please. In terms of the cornerstones of the National Framework, these invite governments to adopt 5 bases for their AI activities, and Melanie will speak to these in detail shortly. But generally speaking, as you can see, they cover AI governance, data governance, a risk-based approach to assessing and managing AI, reinforcing AI standards for consistency and interoperability, and also underscoring the need for careful procurement. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of applying this national framework, some VPS organisations have already begun taking steps to apply its requirements by developing policies and setting up working groups to grapple with the issues. Based on what we have seen, most of the focus has been on regulating the use of generative AI, as described for an AI system. As mentioned, this is a narrow AI that absorbs large bundles of information to develop new content. The applications which are most directed at using generative AI are large language models, and these generate text, and this is such as ChatGPT. These rely on a kind of neural network and are able to perform complex language tasks, such as summarising and extracting text, and these capabilities obviously offer efficiencies for workflows. Other multimodal models can also perform transformative processes on sounds, images and videos. The VPS has consequently sought to manage the foreseeable risks in these technologies, where ChatGPT and other apps have effectively smoothed the way for lightning-fast content creation. To this, the VGSO was an early adapter in the preparation of its AI policy, and this occurred well before the national framework was developed. We didn't wish to prohibit use, but rather to highlight the inherent limitations in these models and to identify appropriate restrictions And by this I mean, checking that we did not put any material to a client or to a court without verifying it. The VGSO wanted to ensure that any AI methods relied on were used effectively, safely, appropriately, and I guess in accordance with our overarching obligations as solicitors. We have since updated our policy to align it with the national framework and emerging VPS guidance materials. Obviously, our policy is treated as a flexible and adaptive tool, and it absorbs new content based on the priorities recognised by our organisation and the broader VPS. This includes the incorporation of recent DGS guidelines, including the Administrative Guideline and Direction on the Use of DeepSeek Products, Applications and Web Services, and this follows the Commonwealth Government Departments of Home Affairs determination that the use of DeepSeek poses an unacceptable security risk, and that subject to a limited exception it should not be used. Our updated AI policy also takes into account the Victorian Government's first key step in implementing the national framework. In November 2024, DGS published its guidance for safe and responsible use of generative artificial intelligence in the Victorian public sector, and we have drawn on this content in uplifting our own VGSO-wide instructions. So the DGS guidance is a common sense approach to using generative AI, and it provides a helpful list of do's and don'ts to regulate use. For example, it recommends that you don't copy and paste sections of content into your work without attributing it and without checking any IP obligations, and that you don't rely on generative AI as your only input, and that you do conduct your own research and analysis, and that you don't enter any information into an AI system that may breach an obligation of confidence, legal privilege, or executive privilege. Now, I understand that DGS is developing a tool to assist the VPS in applying the national framework, but in the meantime, I guess we are all adopting self-help measures to manage generative AI risks. Some organisations are establishing, as an example, AI ethics committees, whereas others are updating their communications to ensure that they are transparent about their use of or reliance on artificial intelligence. Melanie will now speak to the cornerstones of the national framework and will highlight some of the practical considerations in applying it. Thanks, Melanie.
Thanks, Bea. So I will now just discuss in a bit more detail the 5 cornerstones of the assurance under the national framework. I've also included some practical questions which might be helpful if you or your organisation procures or deploys AI technology. So next slide, please. So the first cornerstone is the AI governance. So the use of AI regularly presents challenges that cut across core government functions, such as data and technology governance, privacy, human rights, diversity and inclusion, ethics, cybersecurity, audit, intellectual property, risk management, digital investment, and procurement. There is therefore a need for cross-functional expertise, leadership, and resources to understand and implement AI governance effectively. This, of particular importance, is that this requires having a human oversight over AI and implementing effective project teams and providing training and upskilling and developing clear policies on the use of AI technology in the workplace. So some questions you might wish to consider here is, does the organisation have an AI governance model or policy? This should ensure and help to facilitate ethical and responsible use of AI technologies. And the second question you might wish to consider, for AI systems that impact public services or decision-making processes, are there robust mechanisms in place for people to request information or appeal decisions? Next slide, please. So we move on to data governance. Robust data governance practices are required that comply with relevant legislation. It also involves risk management related to data assets, including the importance of roles and responsibilities and understanding legislative and administrative obligations related to data. Data AI models have different complexities, and if the training data is incomplete or biased or unrepresentative, the AI behavior can reflect this, making it challenging to predict how it will behave in various situations. So we need to ensure that data sets should be accurate, trustworthy, representative, and high quality, and organisations should ensure sensitive systems are up to date and have access controls. So some practical questions you might want to consider here is, what is the type and quality of the data to be leveraged by the AI system? Are the appropriate data sets are the data sets appropriate that are being used? Has a privacy impact assessment and a security assessment been undertaken to help mitigate risks associated with data and security? And can the AI system be misused in a way which might lead to privacy violations, biased decision making, or have other unintended consequences? Next slide, please. The third cornerstone pillar is the risk-based approach. So as it sounds, AI systems comprise a higher degree of uncertainty and more ethical risks due to the autonomous decision making. The risks of AI should be assessed on a case-by-case basis, managed throughout the life cycle of the AI system. So this is from design, verification, deployment, operation, and monitoring. Some practical questions that you might wish to consider at this stage is, can the AI system be used to formulate automatic decisions? Does it undertake assessments, or can it be used for other administrative actions that may have consequences for individuals? Is it clearly understood how the AI may be biased and what different types of bias may apply? So for example here, you might want to sort of request or be able to access some bias metrics and bias reports. Have monitoring and feedback loops been established to address emerging risks, unintended consequences, or performance issues? Can the AI system be disengaged if unrecoverable problems arise? And finally, is there a plan to manage risks presented by obsolete and legacy AI systems? Next slide, please. The fourth AI standard is the AI standards. So I won't go into too much detail because they are on there, but essentially this is the ISO Artificial Intelligence Management System. There's the ISO Artificial Intelligence Guidance on Risk Management, and the ISO Governance of IT, Governance Implications of the Use of Artificial Intelligence by Organizations. Some practical questions that you may wish to consider here is, if the AI system is provided by a third party, does the organization have broad rights to audit the third party to ensure that the applicable standards are being met? Next slide, please. And the fifth cornerstone of assurance is the procurement. So AI can amplify existing risks such as privacy and security. So organizations must evaluate whether existing standard contractual clauses adequately cover these and new and amplified risks. So some questions here that you might wish to consider is, can the procurement be made under the e-services contract, which passes through state obligations on the service provider? So in particular here, we would be looking at sort of the Privacy and Data Protection Act and the Victorian Protective Data Security Standards. And does the AI system comply with local laws and regulations? Some other considerations is, if personal information will be used or handled by an AI system, an organization should ensure that it reviews its privacy policy and updates it if necessary to address the use of AI, so as to ensure transparency and disclosure about how technology is used. Organizations should also consider, depending on the nature of the AI technology, whether any privacy collections notices are required with respect to the use of the AI system or technology. That comes to the end of the presentation. I hope that those questions and that information was helpful. Thank you for listening, and let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Melanie and Bea. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to pop any questions in the chat or the Q&A, feel free to. I haven't seen any come through yet, but otherwise we can always pass on the details. That if people have questions, we can pass on the details.
Thank you.
Lots of people coming through saying thank you. Excellent presentation. So much to consider.
Well, we may move on then, given that I'm not seeing any questions coming through. So thank you so much, Bea and Melanie. That was really interesting and good to know. And it seems to be a fast-moving environment, the governance around AI. So great to get a kind of update on where everything is. So thank you. So we're moving on to our next speakers. So next we have ProvZone Julie McCormack and Taylor DiGiacomo. Julie is currently co-acting Assistant Director of Government Services here at Public Record Office, and she has worked at Public Record Office since 1998. Her substantive role is Senior Manager Government Record Keeping, with responsibility for records appraisal and transfer programs, hard copy and digital records. Her team is responsible for archival description, retention and disposal authorities, and the VERS requirements to support digital preservation. Julie has worked as an archivist in the private and public sectors for many years. Taylor is a trained archivist with extensive experience in Victorian government settings. She has spent over 3 years at Public Record Office as a transfer archivist and project officer, and she works closely with Public Record Office's digital transfer team to address digital preservation challenges and advocates for improving digital archiving for records managers. So please welcome Julie and Taylor as they tell us about the results of a survey that we undertook with colleagues in other states and territories on barriers to digital transfer.
Hi, can you see us and hear us?
We can definitely hear you.
All right. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Yep. Fantastic. Thank you, Justine, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today. I'm Taylor, and I'm here with Julie, and we're here to present the outcomes of the Barriers to Digital Transfer project that we've conducted over the last year and a half. Sorry. There we go. During today's presentation, I'll go over the background and reason for conducting the research, as well as the methodology and the initial data and results. Julie will then take over to present our findings and recommendations, as well as what our next steps are and what we're currently working on. So Prov has almost 2 decades of digital transfer experience with over 1 million digital objects in our custody. Despite how this sounds, we were expecting way more to be transferred with the launch of the new digital archive in 2021 and the more flexible VERS 3 VOs. Many in our audience will be familiar with or have heard of the Victorian Electronic Record Strategy, better known as VERS, which is concerned with ensuring the creation, capture and preservation of authentic, complete and meaningful digital records by the Victorian public sector. A significant component of the VERS program is the development of an effective program to transfer permanent value digital records to the Prov Digital Archive. The VERS assessment programs, transfer advisory services, compliance obligations, and promotion of the digital archive have led to an active digital transfer program. However, in our experience, digital transfers have been occurring mainly from a limited range of public offices for specific reasons. Some of those reasons include a public office having a short lifespan, like an inquiry or emergency response body. They have specific legislative requirements, or like the annual Cabinet Office transfers, there's an existing requirement and arrangement. That's not to say it's impossible for other public offices to transfer. We've had great success with local councils like Cardinia Shire, and we're working with a few public offices currently, but we were expecting more. So the question remains, why aren't more public offices transferring their born digital records to Prov? The opportunity to explore this issue arose with ADRI's formation of a working group to conduct a nationwide project. This was to understand the reason why born digital records are not being transferred to state and territory archives. Members had been discussing this for a while, that it was a common experience and wanted to know more. The data we collected was shared with the ADRI working group and provided further support for the recommendations that were published in the final report. The data and results were collated into common themes and blockers experienced across all archives, and the report was finalised in May 2024 and also presented to CARA. So while the ADRI working group recommended using surveys, we took this opportunity to trial a unique approach to gathering more qualitative data. We found that in the past surveys, while they were insightful, the participation rates were low and conclusions were being drawn from limited amounts of data. We decided to utilise the services provided by DPC and engage the Behavioural Insights Unit. And in September 2023, they ran a behaviour and barrier mapping workshop on our behalf. We invited representatives from public offices that had experience with transfers before. So I just wanted to quickly explain what behaviour and barrier mapping is. As you can see on the slide, behaviour mapping helps to break down a policy problem into its component behaviours, which makes developing targeted interventions easier. This basically means finding out who contributes to the problem and what do they do that prevents overcoming the problem. So at PROV, we decided what the objective or target behaviour was, which was every VPS employee who is required to transfer digital records to PROV does so in a timely manner. And then during the workshop, the attendees were asked to identify the actors who contribute to the success or failure of the objective, and then what behaviour those actors do to contribute to the same success or failure. Then with those actors and barriers in mind, the attendees were then asked to list the barriers and that prevent the target behaviour from being realised. They then split them into 3 types of behaviours based on the COM-B model, which is represented by the diagram. Those 3 groups are capability barriers, opportunity barriers, and motivation barriers, which will be easy to explain when you see some of the data in a second. I'm going to now share some of the results from the workshop so you can see the scope of the problem. Some of the totals to note is that 16 actors were identified in making digital transfers happen, 102 behaviours that either prevent or encourage digital transfers, and there was 28 barriers that were split into those 3 groups that need to be overcome in order to complete a transfer. So here are some of those 16 actors who are either very involved in making the transfer happen or whose behaviours have a ripple effect and might prevent or encourage digital transfers. So from us here at PROV, records units within departments, system owners, records users, to the ministers and heads of agencies, as well as bodies like OVIC and VAGO. And here we have those barriers split into their 3 groups. First up is the capability barriers. This refers to a person's physical or psychological ability to perform the behaviour. This includes things like digital skills for transfer are lacking, lack of funding and resources, or a lack of ongoing programs of disposal projects. The opportunity barriers refer to anything in the physical or social environment that may encourage or discourage behaviour. In this case, it was barriers like there's no triggers or prompts to do records transfer, digital transfers are not part of the BAU, and they're also the first thing to go with budget cuts. And lastly, the motivation barriers refer to internal reflective and automatic mechanisms that activate or inhibit a behaviour. This includes barriers such as there are no rewards for records management, data transfer isn't a good news story, and executive and senior management are more interested in looking to the future than the past. So now I'll hand over to Julie, who's going to share the top 5 barriers and what we're going to do about them.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, Taylor. Yes, I'm going to continue with our findings, our recommendations, next steps, and the current state of transfers. So first up, what are the top 5 barriers to transfer? We group them into broad themes, and look, please keep this in mind. These are really general findings and may not apply to all public offices or your public office. So first up there was a lack of representation of records initiatives or projects in strategic planning. We were told there's no ongoing program within departments of digital disposal, including transfer. There are no tangible drivers for digital transfer, and there's a gap between business planning and BAU, business as usual activities, which records management tends to fall into. And related to this was executive support and understanding. Records are seen as relics and records management's not seen as core business. There's a lack of support, which causes major budgetary constraints, and the benefits of digital transfer for public offices is not appreciated by executives or communicated effectively to executives. So essentially, records are not seen as valuable assets which document business intelligence, which deserve preservation to support reuse. Move on. Next up was issues around access to records post-transfer. There's very much a perception that records are difficult to access after transfer. There's a general expectation that PROV can replicate the public office's record-keeping system and user experience in their own systems. And there's not an understanding about the online catalogue and how to search for and order download records. There's also barriers around the uncertainty of roles and responsibilities. So records management processes are not necessarily led by a records manager or unit that leads to a program of work. There's been a general devolution of responsibilities. So with this ambiguity of responsibility for implementation of records management, essentially it means that everybody or nobody is responsible for records management, including records management tasks, that is, including more complex ones like digital transfer. It's not seen as a core business priority, and very much highlighting, we were told, that the continuous machinery of government changes since the 1990s have created the mega departments, but this hasn't been matched with commensurate increases in resourcing for IM and RM. And finally, it's a really complex environment to navigate. As Taylor showed on her earlier slide, it requires collaborative action from a number of actors, including the records team, the records owners, the public office's information technology team, can't speak, and Cenetex. So it really can be quite difficult to coordinate the many actors and garner action efficiently. So we really appreciated and want to thank again all those people who shared their thoughts with us. We found the results very interesting. We had expected technical difficulties with creation of VOs or PROV processes to present as barriers. However, it was just getting started where the barriers first arise and that we need to deal with. So on to the recommendations. What are we going to do? What can we do at PROV to overcome these barriers? So we've developed a series of recommendations to address them, which are achievable within our work program. And our assumption is that the current legislative framework we are operating under, the Public Records Act effectively, will continue as is for the next 3 to 4 years. So first up is around new communications, that PROV plans and implements a communication program to address the top 5 barriers to transfer, such as promoting an ongoing program of digital disposal and transfer in strategic planning, promoting the importance of planning and resourcing for decommissioning when public offices are commissioning systems, so building that in from the very beginning, making instructional guides on how to access digital records after transfer targeted at the records team, and addressing records access and how it will work at the very commencement of the transfer proposal, so public officers have confidence in the digital transfer program that they're working towards a good thing rather than just focusing on our requirements. So our objectives with this is that departments will consider digital transfer programs as a key thing to consider during strategic planning, that records managers will feel empowered to advocate for transfer of relevant digital records and advocate for resourcing, and records managers will feel confident in knowing how to search for, access and view digital records that have been transferred to PROV. And we're working on all this right now. So recommendation 2 was about updating our web resources and our training to target specific audiences depending on their roles, so they get messages that are key to them. So for executives, it's about clarifying benefits and value of archives and the requirements to transfer digital records. We want to also identify reasons to resource digital transfer projects. And for records managers, it's more about guidance that might we hope will assist and highlight all the various actors that are involved in a digital transfer that you need to corral, so help with the planning and conducting of a digital transfer, clarifying instructions on how to access digital records. And for us internally at PROV, it's about providing regular updates and training to our access services staff on new digital records, including how they're structured and how to access them, so they can help improve public and government user access. We also want to seek out digital transfer trigger opportunities, so exploring opportunities to incorporate digital transfer triggers and prompts into peer government requirements such as machinery government manuals, decommissioning guidance, and we've had some great success in the past working with the Cabinet Office in building in digital transfers and annual transfers into the Cabinet Office requirements. We're also looking at leveraging increasing storage costs as a potential driver to reduce costs for government agencies and reduce their risks. And recommendation 4 for us internally was to look at the broader ADRI transfer blockers project that was conducted nationally, working with National Archives of Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, Tasmania, and New Zealand, and looking at those recommendations and seeing what was suitable and relevant to the Victorian environment. We're all in very different places in Victoria. We're very fortunate to have had a digital archive since around 2005. The other states aren't quite in the same place as we are, but we've all got lots to learn from each other and to assist each other. And we're also continuing our work to research into digital disposal as a separate work item. So next steps. So the new communications are coming up very soon. Very much our focus is to fill those gaps that we've identified that will help get over the barriers. So number 1 being strategic planning. How can we get greater representation and thinking of digital transfer into the strategic planning process? Making records managers feel more empowered about advocating for transfer of relevant digital records and the resourcing required and the planning that's required in the organisation, and also to highlight other resources that are available, not necessarily just through PROV. I'm thinking of resources that are available through the wonderful Digital Preservation Coalition. They've got some great material on advocacy. So sharing that around as much as we can. We want records managers to feel confident in knowing how to search for and access digital records as well. So all the new comms are going to be promoted via the PROV Bytes newsletter, so please sign up for that. So for senior leaders, the communication is going to be around you can transfer risks associated with managing and securing records and costs of digital storage to PROV by undertaking digital transfer. And we really want them to focus and think about digital transfer as part of the strategic planning process. We're also going to be sending messages about, transfer doesn't mean you're going to be losing anything at all. The records are still yours. Your authorised staff can still have full access to the records. And for open access records, actually, you can transfer responsibility for providing access to PROV. You won't have to resource that any longer. We'll also have a series of prompts, which we hope will present as potential triggers for digital transfers, or at least get the thinking going with senior leaders in the department. So things like, is your organisation migrating from an EDRMS to a SharePoint? That could be an opportunity to conduct some digital disposal, including transfer. Are you decommissioning system? Have you recently completed a significant program or campaign? And we've had some great success working with DPC in transferring records of their Deadly Questions campaign and preserving that website for Victoria. Other things are things like paying for storage of digital files that staff no longer need, and do you hold high-risk digital records that you no longer need? This is all the things, if you're answering yes, you should be thinking about planning for a digital transfer and talking to us. So for the information and records managers, all above, of course, but as well, we wanted to keep everybody in the loop about what the communications are, focusing on their advocacy. And also we're going to be creating, it's in production at the moment, I think, or in pre-production, I should say, using Hollywood speak, a new video on how to access digital records once they're in our catalogue. So to finish, I'd just like to briefly mention the current state of the transfer program. So since commencing this work, looking at what the barriers are, we really have noticed a bit of a general uptick in agencies proposing records for transfer. And pleasingly, this has been a diverse group of agencies, inner and outer budget and local government. So that's really terrific. And most recently, we've also been hearing from agencies about the increasing digital storage costs as a driver for them to focus on their digital transfer projects in place of hard copy records transfer. So interesting times. And we've also got many regular processes in place with the departments, in particular the annual transfer of the cabinet records. And I just wanted to acknowledge everybody's commitment and great work to that program, very much appreciated. And we also work very closely with the Department of Premier and Cabinet and Department of Government Services on the regular transfer of records from the various inquiries bodies over the years. And we're learning more as we go through each project. So we've got all these regular streams of work, but we are actually getting more proposals for projects. So I've listed here some of our current projects that are underway at present, and they range from those that are at initial planning stage, such as the Rook Justice Commission, through to archival documentation, access discussion, VO design, final VO production and delivery, ingest of the digital archive and publication so the records are accessible. So apologies, I think the slide's slightly out of date. I'm pleased to say that the vast majority of the records of the Royal Commission into the management of police informants and the Office of the Special Investigator are mainly in the digital archive. So we're very pleased about that. So more information about the process is available at our step-by-step to digital transfers. Web address is there on the slide. We've also got published standards, technical specifications and guidance, which if followed from the very start can make transfer easier. We can also offer departments a free tool for packaging digital records as a VO, a verse encapsulated object, and our VO validation service to ensure the digital records have been converted correctly from both a technical and a record-keeping archival perspective is available for agencies and your vendors, and that keeps us busy as well. So to finish up, I just want to mention that we've got a really busy program, but we're really happy to discuss planning digital transfers with our public officers. So as I mentioned, we can accept a wide range of digital formats, which is liberating in lots of ways. So please get in touch with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie and Taylor. That was fantastic. We've got a couple of questions coming through. First up, they've asked, have other local councils provided any reason for not participating?
Marianne, can you say that again? Sorry.
Have other local councils provided any reason for not participating? I think
not participating.
Yeah.
Not specifically, no. We haven't heard directly from a council saying the reasons why they're not necessarily transferring, but Cardinia is they've had great innovation in their records management there, and they were very keen to build in digital transfer as part of the process to move into new systems, I believe. So it was built in there.
A few other comments, questions, I suppose. One that it seems the barriers are the same for the digital transfers as they generally are for records, in that they are not recognised as a priority or important enough. So obviously a few people feeling the pain there. the costs and risks of not transferring are probably high, but not articulated, acknowledged well in organisations. I think if these were better understood, we'd have a lot more digital transfers. Let me just look. So there's one here. Thanks, Taylor and Julie. Great presentation. I have some questions, discussion points, but don't expect an answer during this meeting. So maybe that's one for a follow-up afterwards.
Yeah, no
Quite
problem.
long...
Yes, from Rachel. Yes, I see.
Yes, yeah.
Happy to chat, Rachel.
Yeah. There's also another question on any news on the new Public Records Act. A few years back, we were told there was one being drafted, but it's not eventuated.
I'll respond to that one.
Yes.
I will do that on the question. So we don't need to respond to that at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, there is another question there about having software to create VOs. So there's a question.
Sorry, I missed that. Sorry, Justine.
Yes, so there's a question in the Q&A area. Having relevant software to create VOs is our problem. Is there a plan to make this process easier and more accessible?
Okay, yes, we have got a VO creation tool available. So if Janine wanted to get in touch with us, we'd be happy to talk through what could be possible.
Okay, I think that's it in terms of questions that I can see. Are there any more that you can see, Marianne?
No, that's it, I think, for the main ones.
Okay.
Lots of thank yous.
Yes, so thank you very much, Julie and Taylor. So we'll move to our final speakers for today. They are Patrick O'Halloran and Georgia Harris from the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action. Patrick has 11 years of experience in water resource management policy at the department. Seeking a closer connection to home and family, he transitioned to project management, applying his policy skills to operational projects in Barwon Southwest. The Crown Land Record Digitisation Project, which is, I think, what we will hear about today, was a great opportunity for project management without the challenges of also dealing with change management, always a novelty. Georgia has over 10 years of experience in archives and records management and holds a postgraduate qualification in information management. She joined the department in 2022, supporting document discovery for the department's Europe Justice Commission response. Since then, she's been responsible for providing support and coordination to digitisation and archival transfer projects at the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action. So please join me in welcoming Patrick and Georgia as they share insights into the Crown Reserves Digitisation and Transfer Program. Over to you.
Thank you, Justine. I'll just wait for the presentation to start. Yeah. So I'd just like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people as traditional owners of the land which I'm joining you from today, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters, air and sky, and extend that acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the lands that everyone is joining from today. So my name is Georgia Harris. I'm Records, Archives and Digitisation Officer, which sits within the Record Services team at DECA. And I'm going to be co-presenting with Patrick O'Halloran, who's the project manager of the Crown Land Records Digitisation Project. So maybe next slide. Next one. So this is sort of what we're going to cover today. I'm going to give a bit of background to the project, and then Patrick will jump in and sort of talk through the actual processes and establishment of it. Next slide. So DECA is the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action, previously DELP, so the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. Our regionally based land and built environment staff are responsible for public land across the state, with the aim of protecting public land now and for a climate resilient future. And that business area sort of represents where the Crown Land or public land management function sits today within DECA. So sort of, a continuation of the Department of Crown Lands and Survey and the various iterations over time. And associated with that function, DECA is responsible for around 255,000 Crown Land files. The majority of these are stored at 11 main offices across the state. The files are historically significant. They document land settlement, land management and use, and date back from the 1850s and also span up to the present day. Next slide. So before both me and Patrick came on board, there is a long history of PROV engaging with the department about the management of these records, including identifying that record integrity was at risk. The department sort of did various scoping and testing out of options to transfer records to PROV, but because of sort of various complexities and the amount of resourcing required, this work didn't progress. In 2021, however, funding was secured for a digitisation and transfer project. The decision was made that this would be based out of the Barwon South West region and run by the Land and Built Environment Program staff. And Record Services had a role from the beginning, first in sort of scoping what was achievable, and then as the project was established, providing project control board support, but also sort of the development of procedures and so on to ensure that processes were compliant with the Public Records Act and DECA's records management requirements. Next slide. We thought it would be good to talk through some of the challenges which really informed sort of the shape that the project ended up taking, and also some barriers sort of getting things off the ground. So a huge thing was that the hard copy files continued to be required to support land management operations. So even though you've got these really historic sort of old files, they do contain critical information about the status of land today, and they were regularly referred to by staff as part of their day-to-day business operations. We did have an advantage when COVID happened, that people transitioned to digital records, so that sort of was a push along for the project to get started. But that's hard copy files. Records held in multiple regional office locations. So I've got a map there on the screen that shows the different DECA regions. In each of those regions, there's around 2 or 3 sites which hold Crown Land records. So that gives you a sense geographically just where the records are. The record keeping system, so the files had been renumbered over time. In particular, from the mid-1980s onwards, the department sort of used electronic systems to manage information about Crown Land. And so the approach that was taken with cataloguing had to sort of take into account the historical significance of the files and maintaining those record keeping systems, while still making sure that the relationship to current DECA systems was maintained, so that staff were still able to sort of search and access the files once they were at PROV, but also make sure that the files made sense once they were outside the context of DECA systems, so that anyone searching them could find what they were looking for. The fact that the files were really fragile, so required specialist digitisation due to their age, that the files contained sensitive information, so a lot of the files had remained active up until really recently, and so approaches taken needed to take that into account. And also scoping what was achievable and necessary. So Patrick might talk a bit more about this, but ultimately the quantity of those 255,000 files that ended up being digitised was around 7.7%. So we're seeing this as a real long-term program of work to address those records. So I will hand over to Patrick now to talk about.
Thank you. Thanks, Georgia. Thank you, Justine, and I'll also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm on today. I'm in Geelong, which is the Wadawurrung people. I acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. So continuing on from what George's introduction, just thought I'd address the question of why did we bother to digitise our Crown land records. The primary reason for digitising our Crown land records was actually to improve service delivery. George has explained that our records were spread all across the state, and so accessing those records meant getting hold of the physical record, which naturally, and particularly if it was required in a different part of the state, took time to access the record, then a copy of the information that's needed. So speeding up that access to information was really a primary driver, and that's why we have actually focused on the active records, i.e. ones that are still in active use and likely to be used quite a lot in future. And we then narrowed that down to originally 11,000, but we'll manage to achieve just under the 20,000 records that we'll digitise. We wanted to make the information more widely available and accessible, so more of our staff could access the information and they could access it from anywhere in the state was a big driver. We clearly wanted to continue to meet our legal obligations for preservation of our records and also to improve some of our cataloguing. Now, I might just add at this point that there's probably 3 technological developments over the last 5 to 10 years that have really enabled this to happen as well. One is that we have an increased capacity with the NBN and our network to transmit data. The cost of electronic storage is obviously significantly reduced, and also cloud computing. So those 3 technological developments really have made this project possible. And the other non-technological development, which Georgia mentioned, of course, being COVID, which actually encouraged our staff to be prepared to depart with their physical records, which they had very considerable ownership of. Next slide, please. Thanks. So just wanted to emphasise here what I consider to have been the most important part of the project, and that was the consultation. So we consulted heavily internally with key stakeholders, and we also went to other departments that have done digitisation projects to gather information, and there really is a wealth of information and experience, and the more people that you can talk to, the more areas that you can get great intel to help with the design of the project. We were able to get information to do with record management requirements and governance requirements for the project establishment, on the technology and the systems that were available for us to manage our digitisation of the records and the digital records, what resources were already available that we could draw on. Really great information for procurement, and that's a key area, getting those specifications right for the digitisation of your records and the documentation that's required. Suppliers, who the available suppliers are, understanding what the quality standards need to be and designing quality systems, and then who the stakeholders are throughout the project. Through this process of consultation, we actually completely changed the original approach that was proposed or designed when the project was put up for funding. And we went to a model that was outsourcing the digitisation activities rather than doing it in-house. So that was a major change and has worked really well for us. Next slide, please, Georgia. Just want to take you through briefly the process that we used here. So there are 5 key stages, I suppose. The first step really involved preparing the records that we were going to send off for digitisation. We sourced our baseline information from a system, Landfolio, that basically catalogues all of these records that we were going to digitise. And we had to extract information out of that to then generate registers that we worked from to locate records and get them into the right condition and the right packaging, I suppose, to send it off to our supplier for digitisation. And that was all done internally with some project staff and our LBE teams. We then had a secure transfer system for those physical files. We relied on our supplier to pick up those suppliers and transfer them directly to the supplier's warehouse for digitisation. The supplier then had responsibility for preparing those files, and as Georgia mentioned, the files were quite fragile. A lot of the files are very fragile, so there's quite a lot of work in the preparation of the files for digitisation, and they also included very different types of media, from photographs to handwritten notes to post-it notes to A3 maps, so very different size documents within those that needed to be scanned. And really importantly, that the files actually had to be disassembled, scanned, and then reassembled in exactly the same order, because the chronological order of the records and the files is really quite critical to the way in which our staff go about conducting their day-to-day work and responding to inquiries in relation to public land. So those obligations were on the supplier. When the supplier digitised those records, we set up a system using Microsoft Teams that allowed the supplier to upload the digital records directly into a system where we could then do some quality assurance checks before migrating those digital records into our permanent ECM site, where they're then accessible to staff. And then the final stage of the project was actually transferring the physical records from our supplier to the Public Records Office, and we've done probably more than half of our records. In total, we will probably have 5,500 to 6,000 boxes or cartons of files to go to the Public Records Office, and I have to check, but I'd say we're so well over halfway to doing that now. And then the other part of the project was that ongoing performance monitoring and reporting and scheduling, and just the general contract management. So that's sort of an overview of the process that we used. Next slide, please, Georgia. So we just thought we'd touch on some of the lessons learned. The first one here is really understanding the Public Records Office requirements for the way in which the records ultimately needed to be received at their end. And I'd say we had a pretty good handle on that. Georgia had experience working with the Public Records Office and was able to provide really good advice about that. And we did have some learnings along the way about what we could and couldn't do, and we've improved things as we've went along. But knowing where you want to end up is really, really critical. And of course, Public Records Office were an important stakeholder in the early stage of the project as well. I mentioned consulting widely for procurement specifications. Not only did we have the benefit of PROVS standards and things, but we also were able to, by talking to people that have done digitisation before, we're in fact able to get hold of some procurement record documentation, which really gave us a good leg up to prepare our own procurement documentation, and we had some pretty good support to get us through the procurement process, which was quite involved and detailed, and was a big part of the initial stage of the project. Supplier selection was really critical. I'd have to say that we probably should have done a little bit more in terms of demonstrating getting the supplier to demonstrate their systems. One of the pretty basic things in hindsight that we actually overlooked and we didn't establish in the procurement process was that the supplier we selected actually uses Google products, and they don't use Microsoft products. And so when we sort of presented to supplier and said, well, here's our Microsoft Teams site we want you to upload record to, they've gone, well, we don't use Microsoft products. So they, whilst we're able to eventually to give them access, and they had to learn how to use it, it would have been a lot easier had we known that at the start. And it also did hamper our ability then to automate our transfer of the digital records, which is something that we actually set out to do, but we didn't manage to achieve for the project, which is really goes on to the systems and the technology, making sure that there's good alignment of technology between ourselves and the supplier would be something that we probably needed a little bit more focus on, more attention to, and what would have made that initial objective to digitise the transfer of records into our systems a little bit, so to automate the transfer of the digital records into our systems a little bit more straightforward, and maybe reduce the manual work that was involved in our quality assurance. I've highlighted data management in bold here. This is an area that we realised as the project progressed, we were managing increasing quantities of data just to manage the tracking of our records and knowing the status of our records and our ability to report to our management and our governance groups for the progress of the project. And we ended up working in an Excel spreadsheets, number of Excel spreadsheets, which have actually evolved and become more complex as the project has developed. One of the things that has made that a little bit more complicated, and this is perhaps a learning for us, is that perhaps some sort of audit at the start of our project to make sure we had records in our possession or where they needed to be, so that we could actually track them down more easily and get them into the system for digitisation at the start would have been an additional step that we could have undertaken. Because some records have started to turn up towards the end of the project, we've then sort of had to fit them in, and that adds greater complexity to the data. But having the skills for data management would have been something that we probably should have brought in early in the project. I know I've developed those skills, but I wouldn't call myself an expert even at the end. And then trying to get them skills in later on was a bit of a challenge for us because we'd already established systems and people coming in needed to learn those systems. The last aspect there I'll just mention is the quality assurance and quality control. We've learned that probably more resources on that would have been beneficial, and more emphasis on making sure our supplier was responsible for greater levels of quality assurance and quality control themselves. So yeah, they're probably the key areas where we've had some good learnings, and we would make changes to the way we've approached those things if we were doing this again. Next slide. Thanks, Georgia. I think this might be on for yours. Yeah, so I'll hand back to you, Georgia.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, so just quickly, we wanted to sort of do some, the future learnings for while the project is finishing up. So I think from Record Services perspective, it's been really great to see how the project has demonstrated how digitisation and transfer supports departmental priorities. So, people are potentially a bit anxious that they're going to lose access to their files and so on, whereas the success of the project has demonstrated how it just makes things easier for everyone. There's really increased organisational awareness of the records, and also just engagement with management and transfer about historically significant Crown land records. So staff all around the state in that business area were involved in file preparation and things like that. So that's been a really good outcome. And also at a higher level, discussions with sort of senior management and executive about a strategic approach for the management of residual Crown land records, which will remain once the Crown land record digitisation project finishes up at the end of June. And we're also looking at options to transfer the digitised copies, which is still outstanding. Next slide, which I think is the end.
Fantastic. Lots of really detailed information there. Great to hear. Quite a few questions coming through. So one of them is around the quality of the images, given that the state of the hard copy records might be quite fragile and flimsy.
Yeah. Yes, the quality of the images has been really good. We have within those files there, I mentioned large plans, for example, old town plans. And one of the comments I've had back from staff using the files is that they were really surprised and impressed with the quality of those images. So, they're able to zoom in and they can see fine markings and markings that might have been done in pencil and so forth on the original plan, but they're able to zoom into that level of detail. So the image quality, I think, has impressed all staff that have used the digital images so far. And even where there were fragile records, our supplier has done a really good job to preserve as much of that record as they possibly can.
Okay, great. We've got a question around indexing of the digitised records. Did you rely on existing record system data, or did suppliers add metadata?
We relied to some extent on existing data that we're able to extract out of our Crown Land Record Management System, or Land Folio. We also added some metadata to that, the main metadata being the dates that the records were between, because some of these files have multiple parts. So we want to be able to give the user some idea of where they need to start looking if they're looking for particular records. So we're capturing dates and a bit of a condition assessment on the records, but largely we're able to use data extracted from other systems to create that metadata.
One around business area willingness to relinquish holding onto duplicate digital copies in their ECM environment after transfer to Prov. How willing were they?
Do you want me to answer that one, Patrick, or would you?
You can. Go.
I think we're not at a position where we can have those discussions at this point, because what's been transferred to Prov, we're proposing that it will be closed under the Public Records Act. And just the quantity of staff that need to access the files, it's not possible to put a structure in place that would allow people to log in appropriately. I don't know if you want to talk to Patrick, people's willingness to
I'd also just add that with these digital records, we've put them in an ECM site where our staff, and it has limited access, but staff going through our land management system can access those. We obviously don't encourage people to make copies of them because they are large files. Their sizes range probably an average of 500 to 600 megabytes, but they all go up to 1.5 gig, some of them as well. So they're very large files that they're storing. And so obviously not files you can email around, but by having them in the central system, staff are encouraged just to access the original version of the digital image.
Okay, great. We've got a question around, did you consider a panel approach for the outsourced digitisation to maximise time for delivery?
No, we didn't consider using multiple suppliers. We have had many proposals come in, and we reviewed multiple supplier proposals, but we did just go with one supplier in the end, which was easier. We originally targeted to do 11,000 records. We managed to do nearly 20,000. So, our supplier really did support us in that effort, and we're very happy to be able to do more records than we originally set out to do. And I'm not sure that we would necessarily have done more records even if we had more time, because we've really prioritised those records that are likely to be high use in future.
And probably last one, a nice hot one. Did you use any AI in the capacity for the project?
Good question. We did have some discussion initially about that, but didn't probably appreciate just what opportunities there were to apply AI. Now understanding a bit more about AI, it has some potential, but it's something that I would definitely include in our procurement in future and our scope for specifications for a future project, and that could be including things like providing some additional features on our files, our records, for people to be able to find records that are commonly sought within those files. At the moment, people need to go into a large PDF and scroll to or use search to find a document that they're looking for. So there may be some way to apply AI to that type of thing. Some of the quality assurance, maybe AI might have come in as a useful application there. So I'm only shoot a few ideas off the top of the head, but I'm sure there'd be some other applications for AI in a future project.
Fantastic. There's a couple more questions, but we might leave it there. We're already running over a little. So yeah, I'll endeavour to get those questions for you to get answers for people.
Sure, no problems at all.
Thank you, Georgia and Patrick. That was great to hear. I've seen the other side of, like, the other end of the process in terms of the records that are coming in. So great to hear about the digitising and how that's been going. So thank you everyone for attending today. That does bring us to the end of our presentations. So I'd like to extend my thanks to all of the speakers for sharing their knowledge, and to everyone who joined us online. And I look forward to seeing you again at a future Records Management Network event. Thanks everyone.